The House Republicans have done as they had promised. Right up front, they voted to repeal the president's health care law. It was going to stop there, pretty much. This is all a period of posturing and waiting for the electorate to break the tie. Come November of 2012, the Senate may not even talk about it, and if they do, it's highly unlikely they'll vote to repeal. And the president, of course, at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue retains his 400-pound veto stamp, so this isn't going to actually repeal the law. But nonetheless, it has reopened the debate because the Republicans now are also talking about moving to what they think would be a good form of health care reform. And they will pass that, and the Senate will probably ignore it. Again, we're going to see a lot of this particular tap dance, but hey, don't complain. You folks collectively voted for all of this, okay? That's when we vote the straight paralysis ticket. That's what we get. We get a Democratic Senate, a Republican House, and a Democratic President. Now, we're going to be talking a bit tonight about the future of health care reform with Cherylyn Harley LeBon. She is a member of the National Advisory Council of Project 21, the national leadership network of black conservatives. Good to have you with us tonight.
Great to be here with you.
And we'll ignore all of those tacky jokes you've heard about the black conservatives that had their convention in a phone booth and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In point of fact, it would seem to me that far from the national stereotype of every black in public life is liberal, in point of fact, any number of African Americans have stepped forward and said, no, actually, I happen to be conservative. It's
right.
It's a little bit less of a stigma, I guess. Right?
Well, I never thought it was a stigma to begin with because as we remember in our history, a good number of the first Republicans after Reconstruction were black, and they held office.
Indeed.
Blanche K. Bruce, they were very, very instrumental in forming and shaping our country after Reconstruction, and sometimes we forget all about them.
Although I'm sure you've heard any number of remarks regarding black conservatism. We had on a guest, and I confess that I can't remember immediately who he is now, but I go back and look him up. But he once got a serious lecture about the fact that he was both black and a conservative from a member of Congress,
right.
And it was along the lines of pretty much, how dare you
right.
have a mind of your own.
Well, it's interesting. Why is it that people think that all black people have to be alike? All white people aren't alike. All Hispanics
right.
are not alike. All Native Americans don't all vote the same. Why do black people all have to be Democrats? I don't understand that.
I don't understand it at the gut level, but I do understand it from the standpoint of I know where these folks are coming from. They're coming from this thing of identity politics, and they would argue that while all whites don't have to vote alike, they would argue that probably all Hispanics ought to, and all African Americans ought to, and all Native Americans ought to.
They?
Well, I think your point is well taken. I can only explain their point of view. I certainly can't defend it because I think it's wrong. They would argue, I suppose, that that ethnicity counts for more than the individual thought process. And in essence, as I say, what they're really saying is you don't have the right to make up your own mind, which to me is the most patronizing thing imaginable. A Klansman would blush to say that.
It's quite patronizing. So, the great thing about living in America is that we have the right to vote. We have free speech. We have all these great freedoms that people in many other countries living under oppressed regimes don't have the opportunity.
Matter of fact.
So why don't we, it's all about free to be you and me.
Well, I think you're totally right on, and I know it's not central to our discussion, but I felt it had to be brought up just because I've had on enough folks over the years that it does need to be mentioned. In fact, Dr. Thomas Sowell, I think, is going to be back on very soon.
Wonderful man.
I hope his health is doing better.
Yes, I agree.
That would be good to hear. All right, now then, let's talk a little bit about this health care law, which, again, as I say, the House Republicans voted to repeal. It will not be as long as the president's in office because it's sort of a centerpiece of what he wanted to do in this country. And now the Republicans are talking about their ideas.
Right.
And I guess we might as well start with tort reform.
Right.
Now then, your thoughts about that, because we have, unlike some of the ideas that will come forward, which are just pretty much ideas, tort reform actually has gotten, I think, a fair trial in, I think, Texas and Mississippi.
Absolutely.
So therefore, we have a track record. What can we say about it?
Right. Well, obviously, this was an issue that the Republicans felt very strongly about during the debate on health care, and it's something that obviously the Democrats did not support because trial lawyers are in the back pockets of Democrats, and obviously this is cutting into money for the Democrats. I mean, bottom line, you're cutting into their kind of pocket, their pool, their cut of the share, and that's something that they just would not agree to. Now,
they do have, of course, they do offer a rationale. They would say something like, well, we're here to defend all of those people who are the victims of malpractice by all of these sloppy doctors and hospitals and so on. That's what they would say.
But on the flip side of that, I mean, the bottom line here is even in District of Columbia, because the malpractice rates are so high, there are a limited number of obstetricians practicing. And what you're doing is you are going to drive out good doctors because they're simply going to say, you know, we can't afford to practice. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
From the time I had my daughter 6 years ago, my favorite physician here in District of Columbia, just 3 years later, when I had my son, she was no longer practicing because she said, I can no longer afford what I love to do.
People, I think, may not have a full understanding of just what we're talking about when we talk about the cost of malpractice insurance premiums. For some doctors, I'm told, the premiums for this insurance will run into the six figures annually.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course now, it also varies depending on the type of practice you have. Obstetricians tend to have higher malpractice insurance. Anesthesiologists have higher malpractice insurance. Not quite as high for an internist, right?
Yeah.
But those performing surgery, because again, it increases the likelihood of things going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So they tend to have higher malpractice insurance. And again, back to this bill, I think that if the Democrats were willing to meet the Republicans halfway on this tort reform issue, you know, perhaps it might not have been so acrimonious, particularly on this issue. And now, you know, look what happens. We had November, now the Republicans are in power, and you know what? They're back at the table, and now the Democrats are not in power. So this may be an aspect of the bill that they're going to have to swallow.
Now, if there's anything to the Democratic claims, their rationale that would say, no, it's not because we're either all trial lawyers or take a lot of money from trial lawyers. It's because we're protecting people from all of that malpractice out there. If, in fact, that argument holds weight, then presumably in a state like Texas or Mississippi,
which
where
has
they've
been
had tort
very
reform,
successful.
That's the question.
Successful.
That's the question. Have you in fact had a lot of people running around saying, hey, I was denied decent compensation? Has there been a rash of complaints, ignoring for the moment whether even they're legitimate complaints? Have there been a lot of complaints?
This much we do know. The doctors are flocking to Texas. I mean, new medical, medical school graduates are looking forward to flocking to Texas and practicing there because they know that they can practice there.
Which is obviously in many parts of the country. I mean, I know for some years it was almost impossible to find an obstetrician or gynecologist in the state of Massachusetts, and you mentioned the District of Columbia. But are you aware? I have not heard of any great wave of complaints.
No, I have not. And this much I do know. I was told by someone a few weeks ago that apparently when you want to apply for a license, a medical license in various states, you have to go before the Medical Society Board. And apparently the wait list for those wanting to practice in Texas is a mile deep.
Wow. Something to keep in mind, folks, because don't take your doctor for granted.
That's right. That's right.
1-866-50-JIMBO is our number, 1-866-505-4626, as we speak tonight with Cherylyn Harley LeBon from Project 21. This is sponsored by the National Center for Public Policy Research, their website, nationalcenter.org, and we're at 1-866-50-JIMBO. We're looking at what now in the great health care debate. Geico has been saving people money on